friends, it's your old pal Jordan the Lion. Today we're coming to you from Sweet Home, Alabama. It's kind of an overcast day, but hopefully it'll be a nice dry day. Daze with Jordan the Lion begins now. And today we are headed to Mobile, Alabama to do a cemetery vlog on a very interesting and entertaining person. Oh yes, Undertaker! We're going to the grave of Paul BEARER! Alright, I think this is our place. Look at their veterans section over here, that's great. Their Hall of Honor. Alright, so we're looking for the grave of William Moody. Big Bill Moody, also known as Percy Pringle III, also known as Paul BEARER. Oh yes! I gotta be really careful out here because a lot of these are just completely underwater. So here is the man resting in peace. It's amazing how when you're a kid, especially with like the way wrestling developed into such a kind of an interesting soap opera cartoony type thing, that someone that you were terrified of when you were a kid or that you didn't like when you were a kid, over the years you would see the genius behind what they were doing. And here is William Moody. Born April 10th, 1954, died March 5th, 2013 by his beloved wife, Diana Lynn. And they were married December 22nd, 1978. Now he has a really, really cool story. He loved wrestling for as long as he could remember. His parents loved wrestling. They were both obsessed with it, and from the time he was 5 years old, they used to take him down to the TV station where they used to film the Saturday wrestling broadcast, and he would sit ringside with his parents watching all that stuff from the earliest days. So he said that, you know, he grew up here in Mobile and there wasn't a wrestling show that came through town hardly that he didn't attend from the time he was a freshman in high school until he went off to the Air Force. He was there every time, every outlaw, they called outlaw promotions, which were not the normal territory. He would go to everything, and he loved getting the wrestling magazines because it would update him as to what was going on in all the other territories all across the country. So he started taking his camera and sitting ringside at every one of those shows. Like I said, through high school, well, people started noticing him, and they said, hey, can we buy your photographs and put them in the magazine? So he became a ringside photographer, and he always wanted to be a wrestler. He was actually a natural blonde his whole life. I know we would know him with that Gomez Adams look, but that wasn't really what he grew up looking like. And he wanted to get into the business, and this was back in the day where it was a very protected business and the other wrestlers didn't really want new guys in there. And so him being the photographer, wrestlers always buddied up to the photographers because they thought, hey, if he takes my photo and it looks good, I'll be featured in the magazine. And so he eventually worked his way in and became a wrestler, doing little independent promotion type stuff around this area, and then eventually was getting hired to go up to the Memphis area and do stuff for Jerry Jarrett. And he just wasn't making much money, took off for the Air Force, did his stint in the Air Force, came back and stayed in the reserves and started wrestling again. Got his foot back in the ring, trying to do it part-time, while also going to school to become a mortician. That's right, Paul BEARER was actually in real life a mortician. Bill Moody wanted to be a wrestler more than anything in the world, or just at least be involved in the wrestling business. He loved everything about it, but he knew he had to have something to fall back on, and so that's what he did. He while wrestling, was going to mortician school and became an apprentice mortician here in Mobile. So Bill started having some success, and at one of those wrestling shows, one of the promoters said, hey, you ever thought of being a manager? You're a good talker. And that's really all it took. They started booking him as manager for various people coming through that were, you know, bad talkers, people that couldn't give an interview, and he would go in there and talk for them. He was really good at this, but it was just kind of like a hit or miss business. And he was starting to take off and started doing it full time. And when he came back from a 5-week trip in Japan, his wife gave birth to their son. And that was kind of a wake-up call for him. And he said, you know, maybe I need something more permanent, more stable. So he put more of his attention into the funeral business and continued to do that. Still loving wrestling, of course, keeping in touch with everyone. And then he got an offer to go to World Class Championship Wrestling. He had been doing stuff with Memphis Wrestling, stuff with Florida Wrestling. He had been really successful as Percy Pringle there. That's one of the things when he became a manager, they changed his name and said, you're now going to be Percy Pringle the Third. Apparently they had 2 Percy Pringles before that in real life, and he became the third. So he became this golden-haired Bobby Heenan type, and he already had blonde hair, but he started bleaching it at this point and went off to kind of feature in World Class and was the manager of the Undertaker. When Undertaker had his very first match as Texas Red, he was the manager of the Dingo Warrior, who would become the Ultimate Warrior, manager of Sugar Bear Harris, who would become Kamala, Ravishing Rick Rude, Stone Cold Steve Austin. All these people, before they became WWF superstars or WWE superstars, he was their manager in World Class. And unfortunately, he started to notice that World Class was dying. They just weren't drawing people anymore. It was poorly run, and he realized that this was basically the point where he was going to have to get out of the business. Yep, unfortunately, it was time for Percy Pringle to become Bill Moody again and pretty much give up this dream. So he decided to call his friend Ravishing Rick Rude and tell him, I think I'm just done. And simultaneously at the same time, The Undertaker had been debuted on WWF. He had a manager named Brother Love, and Brother Love was also, behind the scenes, he was Bruce Pritchard. He was also a coordinator in the WWF offices. So Vince McMahon said, hey, you know, The Undertaker's becoming a big draw. I need you to start traveling with him, being in everything with him, or, you know, it's either do that or do the office. And Bruce decided to take the office position, so they started looking for someone to take over becoming The Undertaker's new manager. And since Undertaker was such a draw, they wanted it to be someone who was different than anyone else they had. They wanted this manager to only manage The Undertaker. So what an amazing stroke of luck. Bill Moody calls Rick Rude, tells him, you know, I think I'm going to get out of this. And Rick says, you know, don't make any rash decisions, Percy. Let me make a couple of calls and I'll get back to you. Well, a couple hours he does get back to him, and he says, Percy, write this number down. This is Vince McMahon's home phone number. And Percy said, I was stupefied. I mean, I couldn't believe I had Vince McMahon's home phone number. So he said, well, he wants you to call him. So Percy, Bill, you know, he would go by all these names. He actually had a nickname of Pooh Bear too that we'll get into. But he calls Vince McMahon, starts talking to him, and Vince says, Percy, where you been all my life? Everybody's telling me that I need to hire you. So they start talking, and he says, when Bill Moody would tell this story, he would say, I remember exactly what day it was, because I ended up signing my contract on my wedding anniversary on December 22nd, but he said they had lost their car. His family had to give back their car. It had been repossessed. He was that low on money. And he calls Vince McMahon and starts talking to him, and Vince says, well, you know, I think after the new year we'll get in contact with you. We'll start working together. So they hang up the phone, and a couple hours later the phone rings again. It's Pat Patterson. He says, Vince changed his mind. He wants you to fly to Connecticut today, and he wants to meet with you tomorrow. So Bill said, I got to the airport, I flew, I couldn't believe it. He said, I mean, I was first class, and they had a guy there to pick me up and take me to 5-star hotel, and I had the penthouse, and they gave me the treatment. And he said, I'm looking around, I felt like I was the Beverly Hillbillies. They said, you know, order anything you want and we'll pick you up in the morning and you'll go meet Vince. So that's exactly what happened. The next morning they picked him up. He went to Vince McMahon's office, and very uncustomary in the wrestling business, he showed up with a tape of some of his performances from TV and a resume. And that's very customary when Vince McMahon works with a talent or meets with a talent. He always wants to know their background and what they've done, and also, you know, what their interests are in life or what other jobs they've had. And so when he looked at Percy Pringle's job application and saw that he was a mortician, he looked at everybody in the room and said, "This guy's a mortician," and they all started laughing. So Percy says, I was dumbfounded. This is my #1 chance to get where I wanted in this business, and all these guys are laughing at me and I have no idea why. Well, it turns out they were looking at him to be the Undertaker's manager, and how perfect is it that he would already be a mortician and would already know everything about basically the character he would be playing. So they start talking to him, looking over the resume, looking over the tapes and everything. And at this time, Percy had that bleach blonde hair like Bobby Heenan or Ric Flair, and a mustache to match it. And as they're watching the tapes, Pat Patterson walks in, hands Bill a contract and says, sign this, have your lawyer look it over, sign it and get it back to us and you'll start getting paid. And Percy said, oh, I didn't have any lawyer look at that thing. I signed that thing on the airplane and sent it back to him. I mean, I didn't care what it said. I was in the big time now. And so he started working for the WWE, WWF at that time, and went on the road with the Undertaker, and they were inseparable for years. They were such a great team, and personally, they got along really well. Bill really took an interesting role in that relationship where he treated Mark, who was the Undertaker, as the Undertaker a lot of the time. Like he said, I would never allow, when we were traveling together, I would never allow Mark to get out and pump gas or go in and buy anything in a store. He was the Undertaker, you know. But he said they were great friends, and they used to constantly joke and rib each other. And one of the things that he used to do, for one thing, he said that his nickname with all the boys was Pooh Bear. Yeah, Bill Moody was Pooh Bear. And the Undertaker's nickname with all the boys was Wendy, because they had seen a photo of him, and Mark had red hair and freckles and whatever, and they said one day we saw him and he just looked like the Wendy character from the Wendy's commercials and everything, and we started calling him Wendy. And they would prank each other because Undertaker hated cucumbers, and Bill would slide cucumbers in his gloves, in the Undertaker's gloves and his hat and stuff right before he'd go out to perform, things like that. Put him in his iced tea one time and the Undertaker puked. And then in return, you know, the WWE apparently was always giving, according to Bill, giving him a hard time about his weight and that he was gaining weight, and he just figured, you know, I'm a manager, it really shouldn't matter, but they just were relentless, he said. And he said Vince McMahon always seemed to be kind of bringing it up or mentioning it, and he said if it happened 100 times, it happened 1,000 times, where he said Undertaker would set me up, we'd be in catering, eating and everything, and he'd walk over and he'd put a piece of chocolate cake down in front of me and he'd say, there you go, Bill, why don't you enjoy some chocolate cake? And he goes, I mean, not more than 2 seconds after that, Vince McMahon would walk by, look at me and look down at that cake and just shake his head. So he just, you know, that's how they used to rib each other. Now eventually WWE decided to kind of break these two up because they needed something different, and so they decided to have Paul Bearer turn on the Undertaker and start managing Mankind. Then later on they would do another gimmick where he would turn on the Undertaker and manage Kane, and Kane was apparently his son with the Undertaker's mother. Really crazy storylines, but that's exactly what Bill said he loved about it. Now when they hired him, one of the first things they said after they got the contract back is, you gotta dye your hair black and dye the mustache black and the eyebrows black, and he hated it. He said he was a natural blonde his whole life, and he just hated the idea, and he said when he first even dyed it and looked at himself in the mirror, he just said, oh my God, I can't believe I did this. And he said, but every week when I got that check in the mail from Titan Sports or WWE Entertainment, I tended to like the character more and more, and I like that black hair. And he was so funny. He got to do so many funny things with this character. It was kind of unbelievable, some of the things that they would come up with and ways that they would use him. Now, eventually, they just decided it was time to give him a break. The Undertaker and Paul Bearer, they just thought, well, the Undertaker needs a change. He was going to go into that American Badass character where he was on the motorcycle, and to quote Bill, he said, can you imagine me in a sidecar, something like that, me riding on the back of the motorcycle with the Undertaker down to the ring? It just wasn't going to work. So they decided to offer Bill a job backstage, doing some of the production stuff. And he did that for a while, and he just wasn't a good fit. He just said he didn't like it. He just felt like it wasn't what he was in it for. And so they ended up not renewing his contract, and he went off and started working for some independent promotions, and then went to work for their competitor, TNA. And by this point, he had gotten really heavy, and within a few months, WWE started calling him and said, hey, we want to bring you back. We have an idea for The Undertaker. We want you to come back for it. And Bill said, no, I'm not going to come back. So Jim Ross called him and said, why don't you want to come back? You know, what's... Bill said, I'm very, very obese, and my doctor tells me if I don't have the lap band surgery, I'm not going to live. And my health, I just can't take it. So they call him back and say, we'll pay for your surgery. So he has the surgery, and he ends up losing 140 pounds, but one of the byproducts of this is he wasn't able to eat enough protein to make him feel strong enough to do really anything. He was always lethargic. And when they brought him back to work, he didn't even have enough energy to be able to go up the stairs without help or a railing or something. So they decided to write into the storyline something that would make him go away for a little while. And he was kind of insulted at first, but then he said he realized that that was something that they were doing for him. That Vince McMahon actually did care about his wrestlers and his talent more than people gave him credit for. And he said he knew if I didn't get a break that I was going to die. So they sent Bill home, gave him a pay and like a Legends contract, and he tried to heal up. Now they used him a couple of other times, but the very last time they called him, sadly his wife had passed away. She had battled cancer 3 times and was the absolute love of his life and the light of his life. And he was often heard saying no two people were better fit together than he and his wife. And he would tell people after she passed that he was just waiting around to join her. But he got the call from WWE again, wanting him to join in and be a part of it, and he said he was very reluctant, didn't want to do it, but he knew that they had a wellness policy and he would have to go be seen, get a physical and everything, and he said, I just told myself, if I can pass that physical, I'll do it, and if I can't, that's a sign I'm not supposed to. Well, he passed the physical, and they did the bit with him getting kidnapped and him in the wheelchair with the marinara sauce and everything, and he said it was actually a lot of fun. He enjoyed everything that he did. He enjoyed that kind of stuff and was really glad that he went back and did it. But he always dreamed of having his own promotion, his own wrestling alliance, and when his health made it so that he just couldn't do the traveling and stuff, he started one up around here in like 2003 or 4 or something like that, and wasn't real successful, and then reopened it, relaunched it again, and again it just didn't take off. But he always had his hand in the wrestling business from the time he was a little kid all the way until the end when he passed away. And it was actually wrestling all the way till the end. What ended up happening was, how he ended up passing away was he had went to a convention in Chicago, wrestling meet and greet type convention, and had gotten some sort of viral infection while he was there and had been fighting that off. And then here in town they were having a kind of a reunion for his wrestling promotion, and he was there and wasn't doing well while he was there and suffered blood clots, and a few days after that he ended up passing away. Now, a couple of crazy things that you might find entertaining about William Moody that a lot of people wouldn't have known. World's biggest George Jones fan. He loved George Jones, loved to go to karaoke and go to bars and sing George Jones songs with his friends, and eventually he got to meet George. They became very close friends, and when William Moody was Paul Bearer, he would invite George Jones and his family, his band members, anybody in the crew to come to WWE events anytime they wanted to, and vice versa. George Jones took Paul Bearer into his family, and Paul could get anybody tickets to George Jones shows. And the way that Paul Bearer got his name actually was from Road Warrior Hawk. When they were talking about having that character, they just, one day he said, wouldn't it be funny if his name was Paul Bearer? Get it, Paul Bearer? So Paul Bearer was known by one of the greatest country singers in the world as Paul Bearer. Kind of funny. And another thing was that I've heard a couple of wrestlers mention this. They said Bill Moody was the greatest joint roller anyone had ever seen. They said he could roll a joint better than anyone. It was like perfection every time. I thought that was very, very humorous. Now you'll notice here, he even has his mortician emblem on there. He was a mortician till he died. He kept everything current. I believe even in 2006, he went back to doing mortician work for a while. And one of the funny things about this was that when they were doing all those storylines where, you know, they were making the casket for the Undertaker, or they were using body bags or urns, things like this, Bruce Pritchard said on his podcast that in the early 90s, you couldn't just go out and buy that kind of stuff. Unless somebody was dead, you couldn't get it. So they actually were able to get all of that stuff through Bill Moody's contacts and using his license to order and purchase those things. So just another funny way of just, this person was just meant for this life and meant for that character. Now, after Paul Bearer, Bill Moody, Percy Pringle III, after he passed away, about a month after, WWE actually did a storyline where Undertaker was wrestling for Paul Bearer's ashes. And some people thought this was just completely crazy. Some people thought, well, this is just WWE being WWE again. And some people thought this is just in bad taste. They actually ran it past his family, and his family was okay with it. And they said, you know, he would have loved that. He loved anything that involved entertainment and the wrestling business. So Bill wouldn't have been offended by that. And even at the end, when he was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, he had The Undertaker and Kane and Mankind come out and do a whole bow to him, and you know, his family said he would have loved that as well. He loved being a part of things, and he just gave everything in his life to this business. I hate to say it, but rest in